Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Book Review and Summary. In this week's episode, we are going to talk about a book titled Wasteland by Oliver Franklin-Wallis. Before we get into the actual summary of the book, please do subscribe to this channel if you have not done it already. That will enable YouTube to push this content for more people who would want to listen to such content. Let's get into the subject of the book. The whole point the book is trying to talk about revolves around how in today's world all of us want to understand the source of the goods that we procure, the source of the food that we eat, but never bother to understand what happens to the waste that we generate after we consume that food. The moment the used item goes out of our house, we assume it is not our responsibility to handle it, and it is someone else who will handle it, and we close our eyes. That's the whole theme the book revolves around. The author starts his account from a landfill in Delhi where he goes to see a huge mountain of trash. It is so big that there are people who are sitting on top of the mountain trying to pick up items that could be useful from there. From the author, when he sees it from the bottom, they are so small. Such is the scale of the landfill that is there. The author talks about how each of the trash has a profile of its own. The color, the smell, and the items that are there in the trash vary very differently. And this one also has its own composition. The sorry part in all of this is, in at least in underdeveloped countries, the trash management or waste management is not very well orchestrated, which means that the trash is handled by people who are generally underprivileged or people who are immigrants who don't have a solid way of earning money in this huge metropolis. The other problem that these people who are scavenging in these landfills face is the danger that these dumps pose. Some of them catch fire, and there are a lot of chemical waste that are part of this dump as well. Of course, there's a lot of methane, carbon dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, dimethyl sulfide, ammonia, and whatnot. You name any poisonous gas or any harmful gas, you will find all of that coming out of these landfills, which make them a high risk site for catching fire. Some of these dumps are so huge that there's a chance that there could be a landslide that can happen anytime, and there are a lot of accidents which have happened. And of course, because these people don't have a lot of support, there's not a lot of news that is being made out of this. Primarily, the people who are trying to scavenge around these landfills try to look for metals, say copper, which goes for a very good price, as well as plastics, which can be recycled and reused, etc. In the countries like US and UK or little more developed countries, the waste management is a little bit better in the sense that there's a structure to it in terms of collection and bringing it to a landfill and processing it, etc. But the labor who work there also face the same issue as what the people in the other parts of the world face as well. The conditions of the labor who work here are not very well managed. The other issue around these landfills are around the serious problem of leaching. What do we mean by leaching? Basically, the chemicals and the constituents of the waste that are part of this landfill, they start to decompose because of sun and other elements, and they start to generate these chemicals which start to seep into the ground and they get to the water table, contaminating the groundwater level as well. Author then moves on to what could be possible solutions around this, how do we solve this, etc. Recycling of materials is one good possible solution, but it is not as straightforward as one might think, because one of the biggest contributors to waste is actually plastic, which is very, very difficult to recycle. And even when you disintegrate plastic, it becomes microplastics, which are very small, minute particles of plastic, and they get dispersed into the atmosphere or into the ocean or rivers or into the earth permanently, and they never leave the face of earth. There are, while recycling is a good thing, it is good for the countries which are actually recycling it and moving it out of their country. The other issue the author talks about is how the Western countries recycle these items and move the items which is actually garbage to poor countries where the environmental norms are not so high standard, which means that a lot of hazardous materials get into these countries. And China used to be a big importer of this to feed their second-hand market, which was thriving at one point. And the population that they have, second-hand market also was thriving, and hence they were importing a lot of this garbage from the developed countries, and they were using it. But the Chinese government later on realized that this is not a sustainable way of living, and hence they banned all such imports, and it hit the waste market significantly because the prices started to plummet because there was no demand at all from the Chinese market. And what happened because of that, the garbage from the developed countries had to go somewhere, so they just found another place, which is countries in the Southeast Asian region, and they continue to dump the garbage there. The author terms this as toxic colonialism. The other solution to handling the waste is using incinerators, where you dump all the garbage into a pile of fire and use the heat that is generated from that to generate power for your city. But the efficiency or the calorific value of the products which go into this is not so great. Hence, you may end up spending more money to incinerate the waste rather than do anything with it. It's not just that. The other issue is the amount of emission that these incinerators generate, which could be harmful again. And also, once the waste is burnt, there is ash which is left over, and the burnt ash doesn't decompose by itself, and hence what do you do with that? Then you tend to export that to other countries again. So something or the other moves out of these developed countries to underdeveloped countries in the form of harmful waste. The author quickly moves on to the specifics of the waste in itself, starting with the sanitary waste or the human waste, the human excreta, and how in the earlier days people used to defecate in the open, and the feces used to be used as a manure or a fertilizer for the farms and fields. But such open defecation caused problems, of course, in terms of the diseases that could spread because of open defecation. Say, for example, cholera was prevalent in that era, and it was spreading through water, which was not clearly managed, and the sanitation across the city was not very good, etc. So, new age sanitation methods come into place, which ensured that the sanitized water is separate, unsanitized or drainage water is separate, and everything was very cleanly done. But the side effect of that was water was used to clean all the wastes that humans generate, and it was pushed into rivers or seas or into the oceans. So this has resulted in the breaking of an ecological cycle. If you see, we eat the produce from the food from the trees and the animals, and we defecate, and we use that feces to generate fertilizer to the trees again. So there was a clear cycle at one point, but now the cycle is broken, and the author talks about the ecological balance getting screwed up because of this. And because of this, of course, what happens is the soil on which we grow the varieties of plants and trees lose all the nutrition, and they become dud, which means that you'll have to force feed them with fertilizers, artificial fertilizers, which isn't helping them at all. And those artificial fertilizers, because of rain, etc., they get drained into rivers again, polluting the rivers all the more. The author quickly moves on to another set of people who are called as freegans. Freegans are basically people who hate all the consumerism. They're fed up with all the materialistic beliefs that the world has moved towards, and the kind of absurd buying that people do. And hence, these people have stopped doing that, and they are getting into this idea of using items which are already either used or discarded as waste, etc. They do this starting from clothes, food, anything and everything. Some of the cases the author talks about in terms of these people recycling is a little weird and extreme. Say, for example, author talks about scavenging the garbage bins to get fruits and vegetables from that and make use of that, which is an extreme case. But the whole point the author tries to drive home in all of this is, how do you avoid the food waste that is being generated either from the farm to the supermarket, or from the supermarket to our dishes, or from our dishes to the dustbin. So he talks about how in the West there's a lot of development in terms of the supply chain being maintained properly, which means that the food that is being produced in the farm fields are properly air conditioned and moved across very neatly to the supermarkets, and hence there is minimal wastage. But there's a lot of wastage when the people buy the food from the supermarket and bring it to their plates. They buy more than what they actually need, and they dump it into the dustbin. But in the underdeveloped countries, if you see, it's actually the opposite. They don't have a lot of infrastructure to move material from the agricultural fields to supermarket, which means there's a lot of decomposition and waste that happens in that leg. The last section of the book is all about industrial waste, starting from the Yamuna being polluted to the level that it is today. It is marked by the environmental agencies in India as unfit for consumption, unfit for bathing, etc. There's high levels of pathogens as well as industrial effluents that you cannot even take a dip in the Yamuna. And the same example is being quoted for Ganges as well, while it is not polluted to the level as bad as Yamuna. But in spite of being a holy river, the author talks about how industrial effluents are being let into the Ganges as well, and how it becomes so unfit for drinking and bathing, etc. The author quickly moves on to other kinds of waste that we generate. Say, for example, electronic waste, which is a big thing in today's day and age. The amount of cell phones, computers, TVs, white goods, etc. that we manufacture today, and the amount of buying that happens for such products, and the whole focus towards not wanting to repair items but then buying a new item, and hence the old items being discarded, etc., is being discussed in the book. The author also talks about how companies which used to build sturdy products which would work for long have moved away from that philosophy to something called as planned obsolescence, which is nothing but forcefully designing a product that will lose its life after some point, even though it could have otherwise lived for long. The author talks about how this was done by the bulb manufacturers in General Electric and Philips, etc., who came together in the 1920s to reduce the life of bulbs by design. And in today's world, Apple is also trying to do something like that, wherein they use software to purposefully reduce the speed of processors in their old versions of iPhones, so that they could sell the newer versions of iPhones, etc. Because of all of this, there's a lot of garbage and junk that gets piled up in the form of electronic waste, and there's a huge market there because of the valuable metals that are sitting inside that. But how are we going to recycle them, reuse them? And going forward, I'm sure because of the consumerism that we have and the e-commerce market that is booming and whatnot, a lot more purchases that are going to happen. How do we handle this is a big question mark that all of us have to answer. The last portion of the book is around the nuclear waste and how the whole world is trying to dispose it. A lot of ideas have been thought about by all the governments in the world. There is an idea also about shipping the nuclear waste out into deep outer space. But the most feasible solution that is being discussed is around building facilities underneath the ground, and you keep in long-term storage there, right? So the author basically is trying to emphasize on the different kinds of waste that we generate and how, as humans, we don't think about the damage that we cause, and we are not bothered about the issue because most of the processing of these wastes happens in the background and we don't get to know what happens there. And I'm sure there will be a threshold point that we will all will reach at some point where there will be a point of no return, and that is what the author is trying to describe in this whole book. Now, what are the key takeaways in this book? Number one, we all assume that the waste is somehow taken care of and we don't have to worry about it. But it is just a matter of breaching the threshold after which there is no way to return back. And number two, the author's ideas to solve the waste problem is to minimize the consumerism that is all around us and get into the minimalist philosophy and buy less things for consumption. And number three, we should try to reuse, recycle more items like the cloths that we buy which are torn, maybe try and stitch it, avoid using single-use plastics and try refillable plastic items, etc. While these ideas have been discussed for long, the execution is what is lacking, and it is high time that we all get into such best practices. With that, we come to the end of this week's book review and summary. Please do subscribe to this channel to get more such amazing content. I'll catch up with you on another interesting session the next time. Bye bye.